Last week, the Community of Christ, an international denomination formerly known as the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and who trace their roots all the way back to Joseph Smith, became the first major denomination within the Mormon diaspora, the broader movement of Mormon traditions, to ordain a woman as their prophet president when they voted in and then ordained Stassi Cramm as their prophet president. Let's talk about the historical context and significance for this development. Founded in 1860 with Joseph Smith III as their first prophet, the RLDS tradition, as it soon became known, was a competing sect against the LDS tradition, by then based in Utah. There were already a scattering of different Mormon traditions that claimed to be the true successors to Joseph Smith, and the RLDS tradition quickly became the second largest, only behind the Brighamites, as they called it. And these two groups, the Brighamites in Utah and the Josephites based in the Midwest, eventually headquartered in Independence, Missouri, became key rivals. They had major theological disputes, historical disagreements, and while the RLDS Church had a broad and complex and layered theological corpus, two of their primary critiques of the LDS tradition under Brigham Young were that, one, leadership had to remain within the Smith family line, and two, Joseph Smith never practiced polygamy. But these disagreements between the two traditions could hide the fact that they largely operated with similar scriptural, theological, political, and social mindsets, meaning that they were rivals because they were so close together in how they approached doctrine, scriptural texts, and history, even if they disagreed with those conclusions. That's why they were seen as being in competition. However, starting in the 1950s, especially in reaction to how they handled humanitarian and proselytizing missions across the globe, especially in Africa, maybe a topic for a future video, these traditions started taking alternative, diverging trajectories, with the LDS Church becoming much more evangelical and conservative in nature, and the RLDS tradition becoming much more mainline and liberalizing. You could see this in how they approached race, how they approached scripture, but especially in how they approached gender. Now, both traditions featured large and vibrant feminist movements in the 1970s and the 1980s, where women within the denominations, recognizing the evolution of gender rights and women's equality, especially in the United States, tried to bring those lessons within their congregations. However, while in the LDS Church, those feminists faced backlash, both in a retrenchment in patriarchal rule, as well as the excommunication of several of the most prominent feminists. In the RLDS tradition, many of their lessons eventually became adopted, most prominently in 1984, when the then prophet president Wallace Smith announced a revelation that women would now be ordained to the priesthood, a decision that, I'll add, led to a schism within their denomination. The RLDS tradition then continued its evolution. Now, outside from the LDS perspective, some might say that it meant forfeiting some of their core doctrines of the Restoration. But to the RLDS tradition, it meant returning to their core doctrines and emphasizing principles of peace, of harmony, of humanity. And these developments, especially in relation to learning new things and engaging with their actual historical past, meant things like giving up the idea that Joseph Smith was never a polygamist and acknowledging the things that he did in Nauvoo. It meant eventually giving up the Smith family line of succession, saying that it did not have to be a descendant of Joseph Smith to be the prophet president. And it eventually led to the change of their name, moving from the RLDS tradition, which they believed no longer reflected their priorities and principles, to Community of Christ, which they argued was a return to the original 1830 structure of the Mormon tradition, the Church of Christ, which emphasized community and Christianity. Now, among the wave of women who were ordained to priesthood positions, including leadership positions in the 1980s, was Stassi Cramm, who over the following decades rose in leadership stature and climbed the ladder within the RLDS tradition, eventually in the Community of Christ being ordained to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and then the First Presidency. And then last year, in 2024, it was announced that she was chosen to be the next prophet president of Community of Christ. But because the church still believes in common consent, a practice that still remained from the original 1830 church, that even though the LDS Church has largely neutered or moved away from it, this meant that that decision still had to be ratified by church membership, which it was on Sunday, June 1st, 2025, when Stassi Cramm was then sustained and ordained as the new prophet president of Community of Christ, the first woman to do so for a major Mormon denomination. Now, it should be noted that Prophet President Cramm and the Community of Christ likely wouldn't feel comfortable with the Mormon label, just like the LDS tradition and Russell Nelson. Ironically, something that both traditions hold in common. But we use that term to reflect the broader diaspora of denominations that trace their roots back to Joseph Smith. I hope this video made sense. If you liked it, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and share this video with others. The Mormon tradition is endlessly fascinating, especially this diaspora of divergent and varied and interesting denominations, not just the LDS Church, Community of Christ, but the Fundamentalists, the Strangites, the Rigdon group out in Pennsylvania. It's the Mormon diaspora. It deserves its own video series.